Cari had been diagnosed in her 20s with bipolar disorder.
There was one point when she just pretty much was underneath the covers for a good week, maybe 10 days.
She was scared about it, but at the same time knew that she was taking all the steps that she needed to keep it in check and under control.
She had been seeing therapists and was on medication.
A car mechanic from Omaha, Nebraska, named Dave Krupa, had his life turned upside down by his unimaginably horrific experiences with online dating. This story begins in the year 2000, where Dave met a woman named Amy Flora, who he fell for straight away. They would go on to have 2 children together, but due to conflicting work schedules, hardly ever saw one another, and this led to irreconcilable differences and ultimately a divorce. Amy then moved back home to Omaha, Nebraska, so in turn, Dave moved there as well, in order to be close to his children. After settling in, he found himself to be quite lonely, and so he resorted to online dating on a website called Plenty of Fish. Dave was looking for a good time. However, before long, he would discover quite the contrary. This is unfortunately where things in Dave's life would begin to take a turn for the worse. In searching out dates online, he didn't have any luck for a while and was bummed out because of this. That is, until one day he received a message from a woman named Shanna Liz Gollier. The two connected and hit it off pretty quickly, often going out to bars together, and truly seemed to be enjoying one another's company. However, Dave made it clear from the beginning that he wasn't looking for anything too serious. And so, fortunately for him, Liz was content with this no strings attached arrangement. She was looking to have a good time as well, and was down to keep things casual. Some time passes, and eventually Dave runs into a rather alluring woman who comes to his job to have her car repaired, and her name was Cari Farver. Cari hailed from a town over an hour away called Macedonia in Iowa. According to Dave, Cari was out of his league in every sense of the phrase, so he didn't really make any advances when they first met at his job. He kept things strictly professional. As fate would have it, when Dave signed back into his online dating profile at home to search out other singles, he happened to run across a profile for the one and only Cari Farver. Fate had smiled on him. They connected and met up for a date. After the date went well, he invited Cari back to his apartment for the night, and she accepted. Before things could progress as planned, it turns out that Liz, his original date from Plenty of Fish, popped by his house unannounced because she needed to retrieve something from his apartment. Date now crashed. The couple decide to call it a night, and Cari leaves so that Liz can go inside and get whatever she needed. They pass one another, and according to Dave, these 2 women did not make eye contact for longer than 3 seconds. After Liz left, Dave and Cari met back up at her place in Macedonia, and their date night was rekindled. They dated for about 2 blissful weeks, both agreeing to keep things casual. But one day, on November 13th, 2012, while Cari was over at Dave's house, he left for work while she was still in bed. As he worked that day, he would receive a very strange text message from Cari stating that she wanted to move in with him. This, of course, was odd, as they had only known each other for about 2 weeks, and also because they had both agreed to keep things casual. Dave, for the life of him, couldn't deduce what had prompted this sudden change in Cari's mentality towards their relationship, and sadly, he had to disappoint her by reminding her he wasn't ready for anything serious. From that moment on, it was like a switch had flipped, and Cari began to act like an entirely different person. She became mean-spirited and bitter. She began insulting him ruthlessly, and at one point, she even threatened him with ruining his life. This naturally boggled Dave's mind, as he couldn't understand what had brought on such a bizarre change in Cari's behavior, as well as her attitude about the nature of their relationship. She had agreed to keep things casual, and all of a sudden 2 weeks later, she wanted more. When Dave stopped by his home on his lunch break, presumably to confront Cari and probably kick her out of his house, she was nowhere to be found, and this would be the beginning of the end for them. Things would only get far stranger from here. Dave would eventually be approached sometime later and interviewed about Cari's whereabouts, since she had been reported missing by her mother days after she left his apartment. Worried, Dave told them about the last time he saw Cari, showed the police officers her psychotic text messages, following which the police officers just brushed Cari's disappearance off as a lover's spat and assumed probably that she would resurface at some point. Despite Cari disappearing from Dave's apartment, she continued to text him loads of heinous and nasty things, seemingly outraged that he had rejected her proposal to take their relationship to the next level. She barraged Dave with vicious text messages and emails day and night, and this wild behavior would go on for quite some time, despite them never seeing one another again. Cari just couldn't let him go and had vowed to make him pay for the way he had treated her. She said things like he had ruined her life, so she was going to destroy the things he cared about, that his life would be ruined. All from a 2-week relationship. For what would become 4 years, Dave and anyone close to him were subjected to much harassment, including threatening text messages from several different phone numbers and countless email accounts. He would get the Omaha police involved shortly after the messages began. However, they were not able to make any headway in the case because Cari had simply vanished and no one had heard from her since that weird day in November 2012. And my one question is, I don't understand why they weren't able to trace or triangulate Cari's cell phone, since they did have her number, and since Dave was receiving messages from her, I don't understand why they couldn't track her cell phone, unless it was the case that the text messages were coming from a different number, but that wasn't really mentioned in the documentary, so that wasn't made clear why the police could not trace any of these numbers. And in January 2013, Dave would spot Cari's car in his parking lot. However, when the police searched it, they found nothing but a single fingerprint that they actually couldn't tie to anyone in their database. Days following Cari's disappearance from Dave's apartment, her mother, Nancy Rainey, would begin receiving these bizarre messages from Cari as well, informing her that she was moving to Kansas to start a new job and that her mother would need to take care of her son from now on. Since Nancy could not get in touch with her daughter outside of these bizarre text messages, and since she had to take custody of her son, she filed a missing persons report with police. Once the police discovered that Cari had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, they stopped taking the case seriously and assumed that she had run away due to not taking her medication. This was just lousy police work. There were many red flags with this case that should have sparked someone's suspicion, from her disappearing from his apartment, yet these messages continuing to pop up, to her abandoning her son. They should have put 2 and 2 together that something wasn't right here. Unfortunately, they didn't. Cari would then begin targeting Liz, the woman Dave was casually dating before he met Cari. She would actually key Liz's car and break into her home to take photos that she then sent to Dave, threatening to harm Liz. During this time of utter confusion and terror, Dave and Liz rekindled their romantic relationship as they were each other's closest friends and confidants during the harassment, and so sought comfort in each other. That would only serve to anger Cari, however, as this would eventually prompt her to burn Liz's home down. Following the arson and this utter disaster, Liz abandoned the town and cut ties with Dave and didn't tell him where she was going, and who could blame her? Her freaking house was burned down. All of her pets were killed. Now truly feeling alone and terrified of what Cari was capable of, Dave decided that a fresh start was in his best interest, and he followed in Liz's footsteps by leaving town to start over somewhere new and getting a new job and a new phone number. This would indeed liberate him of Cari's stalking. However, he made the massive mistake of once more resorting to online dating to cure his loneliness, despite how much chaos and danger online dating had brought him in the first place. He created a new profile on a new site and soon began speaking to a beautiful woman who lived locally. They decided to meet and have dinner. When Dave arrived at the restaurant, his date was nowhere to be found, and she would go on to stand him up. Then, as Dave is sitting there at this empty table, realizing he's been played, he receives a shocking and rather menacing text from the very woman he was supposed to be meeting that night. It turns out it had been Cari all along, who had found him again online quite easily thanks to him foolishly exposing himself and his location, and she admitted to catfishing him, and the threatening messages began anew. It just goes without saying, if you're the victim of stalking, don't create online dating profiles, especially if you've gotten away from your stalker. Why would you invite that back into your life? And so that's just what Dave did. Things would only spiral out of control from here, becoming much worse than they were before. Dave would purchase a gun for his own safety and keep it in his bedroom closet, but one day he came home and discovered his gun was missing. Someone had been in his apartment and had taken it. So over the years, Cari Farver's missing persons case had gone cold, as well as Dave's stalking case, with Cari being the main suspect. Both of those cases had gone cold. So in 2015, 2 young detectives, Sergeant Jim Doty and Deputy Ryan Avis, basically said they had always been interested in the case and kind of wanted to look into it again. So they decided to give the stalker and missing persons case of Cari Farver a second look. And right away, they began to discover some things that were missed in the initial investigation, such as the oddities in the story, the way so many details didn't add up, and the fact that despite claiming to move away and start a new life with a new job. Every bit of Cari's belongings had been left behind in her apartment untouched, as though she had every intention of returning home and had not planned to go anywhere. They also took a look at her bank activity and noticed that her bank card was never used again after the day she disappeared from Dave's apartment. That's when the detectives became suspicious of the initial framing of the case and began to wonder what on earth happened to Cari Farver. They began to view her as a victim instead of a stalking suspect. Since the case had such a large digital footprint with all of the thousands of messages that Cari had allegedly sent to Dave, these detectives employed digital forensics expert Special Deputy Tony Cava, who would turn out to be brilliant and a critical component to how this case got solved. He would look through the chaos of these thousands of messages in hopes of finding a useful IP address to help track Cari down. After a great deal of searching and even building software to specifically assist with filtering through these millions of IP addresses and VPNs, this agent was able to narrow down the search results to one IP address that was used frequently but was not tied to a VPN like the others. He discovered it was tied to the home of an IT guy named Todd Butterbaugh, who he happened to know personally and who happened to work for him. But I guess that's what happens when you're dealing with small towns. With this insane turn of events, the police obtained a search warrant for Todd's house and discovered that his on and off again girlfriend had been using his Wi-Fi for years and that she had been living with him ever since her house burned down. His girlfriend turned out to be none other than Liz Gollier. This is huge, a massive, unanticipated turning point in the case. Now is a good time to remind you that this means Liz burned down her own house. Over stalking this man that she knew for such a brief period of time, she burned down her own house. She destroyed her own life and her own belongings and killed her 4 pets in cold blood: a cat, 2 dogs, and a snake. That is unspeakably evil. Police would then discover a photo of Cari's car on Liz's phone taken about a month before her car was discovered by the police in 2013, and we can all begin to suspect what that means. This is where the case takes a massive turn, and the detectives realized they were no longer looking for Cari because she was most likely dead, and that Liz had something to do with this, since she had been posing as Cari in these psychotic and threatening text messages and emails for so many years. Therefore, they began to plan a ruse to coax Liz into confessing, and this is just police work at its finest. Just a brilliant plan they set into place, and it actually worked. They would approach Liz and deal with her as though they believed her to be a victim of Cari's, when in reality they were gathering information and waiting to turn the tables on Liz the second they found their smoking gun. In all this time, Liz had also begun to stalk Amy, Dave's ex-wife and the mother of his children, and in doing so was also posing as Cari, literally stalking them to a park, driving around their house nonstop and threatening the lives of their children. Liz had even been the one to break into Dave's home and steal his gun, and would later stage a shooting in which she was the victim. So that means Liz shot herself in the leg and then began to turn her attentions to Amy. On record with the police, she told them that Amy had shot her, not realizing how stupid and suspicious this sounded, that Dave's ex-girlfriend Cari had burned down her house and now his ex-wife Amy had shot her in the leg. Liz's mask was slipping more and more by the day, and she was becoming so unhinged she couldn't contain all her lies and evil ruses. She was becoming desperate to get all the women out of Dave's life, and so had set her sights on Amy next, despite Amy and Dave being divorced. So once Liz healed up from her shooting, the police questioned her, and she vehemently blamed Amy and smeared Amy as a violent troublemaker who had been at Cari's throat even before her disappearance, saying that she kept threatening to beat Cari's ass. The police gathered as much info as they could, still ultimately playing Liz behind the scenes and pretending to be her ally. They then encouraged Dave to move in with Amy, his ex-wife, to protect his children, but they had a brilliant ulterior motive for doing so. The police were aware that pushing Dave to move in with Amy would send Liz over the edge with rage, and they might actually get some invaluable information out of her about the things she had done, especially what happened to Cari. Liz began to unravel, and she went straight home to write an email from Amy's perspective, confessing to the fact that she shot Liz. When that wasn't enough to build a case against Amy, Liz called the police crying, asking why they hadn't arrested Amy. They said they needed more details, more specifics, especially if she could coax anything out of Amy about what had happened to Cari. And so this prompted Liz to go home and write another email from Amy's perspective, and this was her most damning and incriminating email to date. She described in lurid detail what happened to Cari on the day she disappeared, according to the so-called confession of Amy, and she even gave horrific details about how the body was mutilated and disposed of. This was all the police needed to reassess Cari's car, which was clean as a whistle on the inside, but once they ripped open the passenger seat, they found a massive blood stain. They then reassessed the single fingerprint found on a mint container in Cari's car and discovered it was a match to Liz's fingerprints. Following this discovery, Liz was arrested in December 2016, although she continued to deny her involvement in any of it. Liz would eventually be found guilty of the murder of Cari Farver after a photo of Cari's foot was discovered on Liz's tablet and her body was identified by a tattoo she had on her foot. This was again discovered by that special digital forensics agent. He was just brilliant. He cracked everything in this case. Liz would go on to be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but the damage she had inflicted on so many people would last a lifetime. It was a great moment in court when Cari's character was finally vindicated, despite her no longer being among the living. Her mother was finally able to find closure, and her son, despite the added horrors of hearing what Liz had done to her, but her mother was eternally grateful to the detectives who gave the case a second glance and finally ended up solving it. Dave was left to feel gutted over what happened to Cari that day he left her behind in his apartment, and was left to regret that he had ever gone out with her, because if he hadn't messaged her that day online, she would still be alive. This is one of the most horrific cases of online dating gone wrong that I have ever seen, and it was recently portrayed in a Netflix documentary released February 9th, which is how I even heard about it. But there are so many more cases about online dating gone wrong that deserve to be told.